Hey everyone, Cara here. And before we dive into this week's episode, I want to thank a brand new sponsor. Conversations at the Perimeter is a podcast exploring the grandest puzzles in nature with some of the people trying to solve them. Created by the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, each episode of Conversations at the Perimeter features a different scientist tackling puzzles like the Big Bang, quantum computing, black holes, dark matter, and other big ideas from the quantum to the cosmos. No math required, just curiosity about our amazing universe. Check out Conversations at the Perimeter wherever you get your podcasts. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is officially Monday. What day is it? August 1st. Wow, 2022. And I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And I'm back. This is my first episode back since my surgery on July 5th. So I pre-recorded all of the July episodes in advance so that I would make sure that I had coverage for you guys while I was recovering. It's been a bumpy road. It was really hard. The first week was really hard post-hysterectomy. Then it got easier and easier. I'm now in week 3 because I'm recording this a little bit early, and I'm doing really well. I have my range of motion back. I can handle a little bit of weight, and I'm independent again. I can pretty much do everything I need to do for myself except carry very, very heavy objects. I'm also quite tired. A lot of things make me very tired. So if I go on a walk or if I do kind of typical things like run to the grocery store and back, I often need a nap after. They say, don't you love it when people say they say? They say, the experts on the interwebs. They do, though. A lot of physicians and researchers do say that that's pretty typical after major surgery, even a laparoscopic one, because, of course, your incisions heal a lot faster. Kind of your external teeny tiny laparoscopic incisions heal a lot faster than all of the tissue. And so your body's still healing and you're tired. You're tired on a cellular level because you are using so much of that ATP, of that sort of cellular currency, to heal. It's going towards basic metabolic processes that you don't have a lot of extra energy for the normal stuff that you're used to doing. That's why I'm not working out yet, but I will soon. And if you want kind of a full breakdown of what the surgery was, why I had it, the cancer diagnosis, kind of what my prognosis is, and everything that we discovered on the pathology, I do a little bit of a deep dive, I guess you could put it that way, on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe on our most recent episode. So I recommend checking that out. I don't want to take up too much time with that because we have so much fun stuff to get to this week. So first and foremost, I do want to thank all of you amazing patrons that make Talk Nerdy possible. You're the reason that I'm able to continue to make the podcast every week because I do sell some ads, which helps with a little bit of income, but it's really heavily offset by my Patreon. That helps me pay my assistant Noelle. It helps me pay for the editing team that I work with, Pro Podcast Solutions. And it also helps me, when I need to buy new equipment. For example, I just recently had to buy a new MacBook Air because my MacBook died. And now I have to see about maybe getting a new preamp because I'm not sure if my old one is compatible with the new MacBook Air. So little things like that, always a chain reaction. This is the kind of stuff that helps keep the podcast going because it ain't cheap, I'll tell you that. All right, so let's give a shout out this week to Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Dudas Infinitas, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, Joe Wilkinson, Leonard Prince, Pasquale Gelati, and Ulrika Hagman. Thank you all so much for pledging your support on each episode of Talk Nerdy. All right, let's dive into this week's show. So I had the opportunity to chat with Dr. Olivia Castellini. So she is a physicist. She got her PhD in physics. But she previously studied both physics and music. And now she works, I love this, you guys, as the senior exhibit developer at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. So she is engaged in dreaming up and making these incredible museum exhibits come to light. And we talk all about museum science, all about engaging the public, and what it takes to develop really cool, in-depth museum exhibits. So without any further ado, Here she is, Dr. Olivia Castellini. Well, Olivia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I am excited because I'm excited for several reasons. First and foremost, I took 4 whole weeks off of the podcast as I've been recovering from surgery. And so this is my first episode back where I'm recording live and it hasn't been in the can. Like I did have an episode for those 4 weeks, but I recorded them all in advance and I recorded the intros in advance. And I was like, I don't know if anything is new in the world, but it's a new week. So now I'm back. We're actually recording this on Tuesday, July 26th. That'll come out the following Monday. And it's exciting to be back.
Well, I'm flattered to be your first conversation back. Welcome back.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully I can make it interesting for you.
I know you will. And I'm super pumped about this as well, because this is one of very few episodes where it wasn't a publicist, it wasn't a book, it wasn't some sort of academic exchange. It was a listener of the show that reached out and said, you need to interview Dr. Olivia Castellini. She's fascinating.
Oh, no way.
And she'd be great on your show. Yeah.
Oh,
and so
I had no idea.
We were like, let's do it. I want to do
I should
that.
send flowers and a thank you.
Right? And I don't even know who it was, because my assistant,
it my mom?
Right? Maybe that's why she didn't tell us. No, my sister reached out and said, hey, a listener recently suggested the below 2 guests. What do you think? And so it was you, and then another guest that's coming up soon. I think it's pronounced Jingmai O'Connor, and also in Chicago. And so I'm super excited to be chatting.
Listener, wherever you are, if you're listening again, thank you so very much. I'm super flattered.
Yes. So tell me. First and foremost, you are Chicago-based, right?
Yes, okay. I am Chicago-based here at the Museum of Science and Industry.
Right. So this is your sort of full-time gig, is that you're at the Museum of Science and Industry, but you yourself are you a physicist? Are you a material scientist? How would you describe kind of your academic background?
Yes, I am a physicist.
Okay.
So I have a PhD in physics from the University of Wisconsin up in Madison. And my area of expertise is solid state. So I studied nanotechnology related applications.
Right. So very kind of experimental and then also applied physics, not theoretical physics.
Yes. Yeah. No, I love getting my hands dirty, getting in the lab, getting in the machine shop and building things. So yeah, I'm definitely an experimental physicist for sure.
Absolutely. And that's not the only thing. I mean, none of us are so unidimensional, but not only are you a physicist, but you've been working as a public communicator of science and really advocating for women in science for quite some time, right?
Yeah, no, I'm going on 16 and a half years here at the museum. So that was, and it's a job that I adore, but I never expected to do. I thought I was going to come do this for 2 years and then go back to academia.
Mm-hmm.
But I love science communication, and I love science and the big crazy ideas of science. So coming up with fun ways to tell the world about all the amazing things happening in science is really just so much fun, and I absolutely love it.
So I am a museum nerd. I love museums. I'm here in LA, so I spend a lot of time at the LA County Natural History Museum. We also have a science museum here as well. And every time I'm in a new city, if I have downtime, I'm visiting the museums. And I have to say, I don't know how common it is for individuals who are training, especially in what's often considered, quote, I'm doing air quotes here, the hard sciences, individuals who are like very academically oriented, to even recognize that museums are a potential career, that there is a world where a scientist can do really important work in a museum. I think we often think of maybe paleontologists realize that, but that it's not a common conversation within academia as people are working towards their terminal degrees.
Yeah, no, I think that's sort of spot on. I think the idea of science communication and its relative value is sort of underappreciated in academia. There are lots of wonderful things about academia and doing research, but the important job of communicating that knowledge to the public. Museums really do have serve a very important role in communicating that to the public. And so it really is a specialty to be able to take those sort of those big ideas and translate them for the public so that they can also be educated and get involved in science.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, that you're mentioning the public kind of as a whole, because I think a lot of times there's also this misunderstanding, or maybe I shouldn't say misunderstanding, but this um, minimization that somehow museums are for kids and not adults. But museums are really for everyone. I mean, the family unit is actually very much in mind during museum design and construction and thinking about different exhibits, right?
Yeah, they absolutely are. So when you think about designing an exhibit, you are spot on. Where often it's sort of a middle school age range that sort of gets the attention or that we design to. But the reality is, an 8 or 10-year-old is not coming by themselves. They're coming with caregivers or teachers or younger siblings. And it's not always middle school kids. We do get a lot of multi generational groups, but also adult groups without children. So, museums really are for everybody. And they, especially in this day and age, like they are community hubs. They are an opportunity to bring people together, to give them a safe and comfortable place where they can engage in science and some of the conversations and put into context some of the things that are happening out there in the world. And so the role of museums just in communities and in society is incredibly important as a place where people can come for sort of a safe space for conversation, but also trusted information and a trusted space to come and engage with science content.
Oh, what an important point to this idea of sort of distrust of authority, questioning of, what is reality, what is fake news, like all of these kind of almost like postmodern conversations that are happening in society, uh, uh, kind of related to these, I think, important philosophical questions, but ultimately that have been taken into a pretty scary, far place. These bastions really are museums. Like these are places where it's relatively kind of hallowed. Like we know that this is legitimate science, that these individuals are engaged in peer review, that that there are collections present, and that all of the sort of stakeholders are really looking at the stories that are being told from so many different angles to say, how can we be most reflective of reality?
Right. Well, and to give people an approachable space. I mean, it's not even just, that we are in kind of an incredible time right now, but also the world can be, and technology can be incredibly complicated. And so finding a place where it is inclusive and it is comfortable to come and ask the questions and to get in on the conversation, providing that platform and that space for people, because it is important. We are touched by science and technology in all aspects of our lives, and we've really, in the past 2.5 years, that's been really evident and at the forefront. But even beyond that, having a place where you can come and let people get valid and trusted information, and have a place where they can have those conversations and engage is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think there are two words that you really struck there that speak to me, I think, at a deep level. And one is kind of inclusivity, access. This idea that museums are these places where there are a lot of barriers that are broken. They tend to, not always, but they tend to exist in more like inner city portions of the large city, in very often lower income areas. They tend to cater to everyone. There are almost always free museum days or low cost entry or group entry for schools. So the idea here is we want to make sure that people do have access to this information. But then the other thing that really spoke to me was this idea of interactivity, because I think we often still think in our minds of the museum as the diorama, but that's not the model anymore, is it?
No, although I do love a good diorama.
Me too.
Um,
Me too.
oh, I do love natural history museums because they tend to have a lot of them, and I love it.
Like really
Um,
classic taxidermy. Yeah,
oh,
that can be
yes,
very fun. You're right.
yes. Oh my goodness. But yeah, it's just that sort of, it's a friendly, more approachable environment. Science often gets a bad rap because we all took it in school, and there's a textbook and an answer and a test, and there's right and wrong and all of those things, where the science itself is actually a lot more creative and a lot more exciting than that. There's questions and exploration and creativity, and there aren't always answers. And that's kind of the beauty and the fun of it. So museums are great because we're not giving you a test at the end of the day. We want to come in, um, you know, show you a good time, teach you something new if we can. But it's really about breaking down those barriers and making you feel comfortable and getting engaged in the content in a way that um, mostly in school we aren't really presented with science in that way. So it's a lot less intimidating to come to a museum. So it's a great opportunity, and also I think an obligation for the museum community to leverage that to really sort of move the needle for people on science and their involvement and their perception of it.
Oh, absolutely. I often think about science. Clearly, there are different ways to conceptualize science, but one of the things that both here on the podcast and on the other podcast I work on, The Skeptic's Guide, that we often really reinforce is the idea that science is a process, it's a method, it's a way that we, as you mentioned, engage with information, ask questions, test hypotheses, measure results. And I feel like more and more often we're seeing that museums are paralleling that in their exhibits. Instead of saying this is the way things are, they're saying come here, test this out, try this, manipulate this thing, see what kind of result you get. And it's so cool to be able to, I mean, I think those are the exhibits that are like the upper echelon. The exhibits that are the most important are the ones that ask museum goers to do science in the moment.
Yeah, no, and that's a great observation, and you really did just out yourself as a total museum nerd. Um, 'Cause you've been paying attention, Cara. Um, but yeah, the idea of museums are really making an effort. There's within our industry of being more participatory, which for science that seems like such a no brainer because science is participatory. It's like you don't, instead of just presenting something and having museum guests absorb it,
Right.
we want them to be part of the conversation. And so having things that are more hands-on, or like, did you ever think about it this way, or leaving it more like with open-ended inquiry, that is a lot more fun as an exhibit, in my opinion, as an exhibit developer. It's a more fun experience. But I think it's also a richer experience for the museum guest to, rather than just sort of come and get a download, to actually get their hands dirty a little bit and experiment and explore for themselves.
And so I want to know from you, what kinds of exhibits at and is the short for Museum of Science and Industry MSI?
Yes,
Okay.
MSI.
So at MSI in Chicago, what kinds of exhibits, have you worked on? What are some of the ones that you're proud of? Like, how do you take, your knowledge about nanotechnology, about physics, and translate that into these interactive and engaging museum exhibits? Because there's clearly you're working on things beyond what you studied in school. Like
Oh,
science communication
absolutely.
is much broader. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and that's part of the beauty of my job. So a lot of what I build on is my training as a scientist.
Hmm.
So there's a lot. I mean, I did work on developing concepts for an exhibit on nanotechnology, but I also, that is one exhibit over 16 and a half years. Like I'm constantly able to learn new things. I sort of joke that best part of my job is going around and poking my nose in everybody else's lab and seeing what they're excited about and what they're working on, and then coming back and telling the stories. So the skill of just being able to talk to scientists and sort of ferret out what those big ideas are and what it is that they're studying, and then translating that into a good story. for people. That's really just, I love going out and learning all kinds of things. I've gotten to go tornado chasing. I've gone to explosives camp, all things that I never were just about as cool as it sounds. That really was fun.
Yeah.
Um, they blew up a car for us. It was
Oh,
fantastic.
no way.
Yeah, all things that you never got to do studying, transistors in a basement in Wisconsin. Um, so yeah, so I love that bit about my job in developing museum exhibits, where it's like, it's what crazy idea do you have? Who's out there doing some cool research, and how can we tell the world about that? So it is fun.
Oh, I love that. And according to the MSI website, your title is Senior Exhibit Developer.
Yes,
That's so cool. So,
right.
so the bulk of what you do at the museum is actually dream up and make into a reality the different exhibits at the museum.
That's the perfect way to describe it.
Wow.
So basically, if it's bolted to a floor, if it's written on a wall, or appears on a media screen, that's what I make. So
That is really cool. Like, I don't know why I always assumed that happened, that was farmed out at museums. Like, I guess I never envisioned that there are people on staff at museums who do this all day, every day.
yeah, well, and it's done a little differently depending on the museum. So
Okay.
MSI is a very very large museum. So if you listen to our marketing materials and folks, we are the largest science museum in the Western Hemisphere.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, but our building is physically large. We have over 400,000 square feet of exhibit space. So um,
It's
we
hard for me
have
to
the
imagine what that looks like.
oh
Like
yeah, four
400,000. Wow.
over 4 acres of space.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's fun because we get to do things a little bit differently. We also have to do things a little bit differently, since we are in this big, gorgeous, historic, landmarked building. We get to do things like 4-story indoor tornadoes because we have the space. And if we only made it 1 story tall, you'd kind of miss it, because the space is so big. So we do get, it does afford us the opportunity to kind of be audacious and do big, daring, crazy things, um, all in the interest of science
I
and
love that. So,
communicating it.
so what are some like exhibits that you've worked on somewhat recent, or maybe even not recently, just some that you've been really proud of or that have really spoken to you personally?
Sure. Well, Science Storms is the exhibit that actually brought me to the museum to begin with. So that is all about basic physics and chemistry, which is, as a physicist, where I came into it. But that is the story behind that one, because we at MSI we like to come up with sort of a big kind of a story, and sort of interpret all of our science that way. And so the idea with Science Storms is that science is inspired by a sense of awe at nature. So you look outside and you see something like a rainbow or a tornado or something like that, and you go, that's cool. How does that work? And so the whole idea is that science is inspired by this sense of awe at something out in nature. And so we sort of took that kernel of the idea and sort of fleshed out this story, to incorporate natural phenomena. So the exhibit actually recreates at a large scale 7 different natural phenomena, including tornadoes, tsunamis, avalanches, sunlight. And we have these large scale recreations. So we have a 4-story indoor tornado, we have a 20-foot diameter avalanche disc, giant 30-foot long wave tank.
Oh,
And
wow.
and the wave tank is probably my favorite. But using those as a way into different areas of physics or chemistry. And so, I'm really just was honored to be part of that team, but also like it is just, I'm super proud of that exhibit, because of just such a dare to be able to like just from the engineering side of it, like can you build a 4-story indoor tornado? Like we didn't know when we started out. Turns out you can.
Right. Right. And
But
how
just being able to think creatively around like, well, what if you could build a 4-story tornado? Then what would you do with that? And turning it into a hands-on experiment that people can control. the wind in there and get to know and sort of all the different sort of physics that goes on in there by manipulating it themselves.
And how much more like just impactful and effective having something at such a scale, because we've all been to science exhibits where there were indoor tornado, I think, but they were usually like tiny, like, like maybe a few feet, or sometimes even smaller, like a tornado in a bottle. But to be able to really see almost the scale that you might see in nature and up close in a safe way and investigate it, kind of be able to really be the scientist in the room. I mean, I can imagine that that's life changing for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to that, the kernel of the idea was science being inspired by a sense of awe at nature,
Hmm.
leveraging the space that we have. Like, you better experience a sense of awe. Like, when you
Right.
come around the corner and you see this thing, if you don't catch your breath and go, for just a second, that it was a very intentional thing for us, to sort of really grab people and engage them. Because if your heart's in it, your mind will be in it, and it's a much better learning moment, for people.
Oh, that's so cool. It's so, I mean, like, I'm getting really excited because I want to come visit like ASAP.
Come
Um,
on over.
yes, yes. And that brings up a question. I'm going to kind of take like a hard left here, but it brings up a question about, of course, we can't ignore, we can't deny what's going on in the world right now. We often talk about how, like, oh, sort of post pandemic. We're not post pandemic. The pandemic is still raging. It's taken new forms. Obviously, the virus is mutating, but there was a period during the beginnings of the pandemic when we didn't have vaccines, we didn't have rapid tests, we didn't even have PCR tests, where it simply wasn't safe. It wasn't safe to congregate. And I'm curious, what did you do, considering what you do for a living, at the beginnings of the pandemic, as the pandemic was peaking? How did you adapt? Was the museum shut down? While it was shut down, what kinds of things were you thinking about? How did your job um, develop and evolve?
Yeah, like the rest of the world, everything came to a real hard stop. We
Mm-hmm.
were, I had an exhibit project I was working on that was due to open about 6 weeks after the pandemic hit. And it's like, well, we
Ugh.
went from full on crazy and installing things to nothing.
Right. Right.
But it was an interesting kind of inflection point for museums in particular, because it's a physical space you come to touch things and interact with other people. So none of those things were happening at the start of the pandemic. We were very consumed at first with shutting down. It's non-trivial to shut down a building of this size and this kind of operation. We do have live animals in the building, so there's all kinds of things around, logistics around that. But then shifting to, there was a need, again, for credible resources of scientific information. And the museum community, stepped up to try to fit that in a lot of ways. So we pivoted very quickly to try to figure out how to produce or digitize content we already had. We also, there were teams who were involved in creating exhibits, online, and then eventually, when we were able to reopen, a physical exhibit here in the museum about COVID and about vaccines, to start helping educate people on, like, what vaccines in general are and the purpose, and sort of the history of them. Because I think museums, our purpose is to provide valid information for people to draw their own conclusions, especially when it comes to something so personal like vaccines, or pandemics. There's a history, in the world of pandemics. So really trying to be a resource for the community and for the public to get, credible, information, so that they could really understand the context of what was happening around them, with so much news or science in the news cycle at that time. Um, we really took it very seriously, in that responsibility as a community institution to be a resource. Um, there was certainly efforts to try to push content on digital and in building platforms about COVID. but then also starting to look at once, so we were closed for a few months. We reopened and then were forced to close again when the second wave hit. But we took a real hard look at, from the design side, how do we adapt our physical exhibits, all of which are supposed to be interactive in a world where we weren't sure it was safe to touch things. So there was a lot of work in rethinking interactivity. So how do we adapt some existing exhibits, or what exhibits did we have to sort of shutter for a little while? Looking at how we could move some of that content over to other platforms. But also there's been a really interesting sort of looking at visitor behaviors. So what are people willing to do in a public space? So that's been an interesting, I think there are some shifts there now as we're getting further out from the start of this thing. There's some real opportunities there for the museum community to learn on the design side, and think, it's been a good challenge, I think, in a positive thing to rethink interactivity and what that means. So it's been an interesting design and creative challenge to think a little differently about how people interact with our stuff within the space.
Yeah, and it's funny because I would never label myself a sort of like traditionalist. I would never label myself conservative by any stretch of the term, but it's funny that, and maybe this is like the psychologist in me, that I think about adapting. I think about change. I think about some of the things that COVID has sort of forced us to reckon with. Like, for example, I work as a psychotherapist now, and I've moved basically to an only online model, which I think serves especially the population that I work with, which is, individuals who are dealing with life limiting illness. So people who are usually quite sick, being able to see them in the comfort and privacy of their own homes via telehealth has really opened up a lot of doors. Yet, at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, I don't want to live in the metaverse. There's a need for physical spaces. There's a need for being able to touch things, for meeting up with people in meet space and having conversations. And there's only so much I want to see the museum adapted, because
Right.
I miss the I think there's a psychological need for these types of things.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, there will always be just a human desire to go and interact with each other and go to a place. And I think there's still a value and there to a museum experience, like coming to a physical place and doing a thing that you're not going to get by putting on a headset or logging in. Those are all great experiences in their own right, but for different reasons. But as a museum professional and as an exhibit developer, thinking about, like, what are those things that, like, what is it about the museum experience coming to our space and seeing things? You can't, I could do a 360 video of standing inside the tornado and science storms. It's not going to be the same as coming here and standing inside the tornado. And so it's really, forced me to rethink, how do we really make good on, like, if you, why do you have to be here? What is so magical, or how can we make that moment magical and worth the effort to get off the couch, get on the bus or in the car and come all the way down here? Like, what is it that we're telling you, or the experience we're providing for you, that you cannot get any other way? And I think there's still, I think the pandemic kind of proved that when we were all locked up and we couldn't see each other for such a long time, there really was that hunger to come back to spaces and places and see people and interact with things. So we just need to think a little bit differently about what that value is and how we provide that kind of experience.
Yeah, I mean, it must be so difficult, challenging, but also exciting to really think about these spaces from so many different angles, because I don't know, the thing that comes up for me is this sort of modern um want to sort of quote, do it for the gram. And of course, they're like, you almost have to think about the fact that something like a 4-story tornado is just, it's awe inspiring. It's marvelous, but people also want to be able to capture this and share it in social media and say, look, I was a part of this. Yet there's this conversation that we're having about how, like, when you're there, like, you're never going to be able to capture it the same way in a post as you would for by just being there. And so, like, you don't want to dive too deeply into one or the other perspective, right? Because culture is evolving the way culture is evolving, and whether we like it or not, people are going to engage so that they can then show their engagement. But at the same time, you want them to be really present while they're there.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's absolutely, it's sort of threading that needle between giving the
Yeah.
people what they want and then giving them something they may not have expected.
Right, right.
But I think, for me, I think focusing on the thing that is evergreen in there is the idea that humans are always going to want to share what they know or share an experience. The mechanism by which we do that might evolve over time. Right now, we're all about the socials and the little square things we carry around in our pockets. But it's like the basic thing there is still that desire to share an experience with somebody. So how can we create that experience that you have to be here to do it, and hopefully take a pretty picture, post it so it encourages more people to come.
Yeah,
However,
exactly.
but like, what is it that about, like, when you go hiking and you're like in a mountain range or whatever, and you take a picture and you look at it later, it's like, it was so much cooler while I was standing there.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
you
sort of
really
like,
can't capture it. It's like, well, I guess there's that juxtaposition too, because I am not a photographer. So, of course, I never feel like I've captured something in images. That's why my Instagram is kind of boring. Yet, there's also the whole movement of these sort of social media content creators who capture things that are in no way reflected. Like, they look way better on Instagram than they do
right.
in real life.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like,
The
so like,
skill.
museums is sort of that authenticity of experience, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all of us, I have everyone's life looks much better on social media than it is in reality. I don't care who you are. Um, but, there's a certain authenticity. I think that museums can have, getting just back to the science, but it's like you can't fake that,
Right.
so what is that? Like, we have the potential to sort of create those magic moments, and those authentic moments that you can't replicate or fake, when you're just
Absolutely.
hanging out
Absolutely.
with your smartphone in your bathroom recording things.
And that's, of course, a lot to think about. So, I'm curious. I want to take another kind of hard left here. And I think that we will obviously come back to all of the museum nerd stuff because that's where I like to nerd out. But there's a couple things that are interesting to me as I'm reading about you. One is that you've been involved with the If Then initiative, the If Then She Can exhibit. And I want to talk a little bit about that. My very best friend in the whole wide world, Crystal Dilworth, who's been on the show multiple times,
Yes.
was also involved in the exhibit and in the television show that kind of goes along with it, the morning show that goes along with it. And do you know Crystal?
Yes, she is wonderful.
Oh, love
So
that.
it's yes. Oh yeah. No, I'm constantly amazed at how I got lumped into a group with such amazing, incredible women, Crystal included. I'm always in awe. Every time I talk to another ambassador, I'm just like, how you are magic. How am I possibly talking to you or part of a group with you?
So I want to know about this, for people who don't know, because of course I'm kind of like intimately aware because so many people that I know are involved in it. But this is a AAAS initiative, right?
Yes. So it is a joint venture between the AAAS, so the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Lida Hill Philanthropies, which is a private philanthropy based out of Dallas. So the If Then initiative was really aimed at trying to encourage more women and girls to participate in STEM. So one of the ways in which they were going about that was this ambassador program, which Crystal and I are involved in. So they chose 125 women from all stages of career, from grad student to retired, across all branches of STEM, academia to applied to crazy things like exhibit development. And the idea was to try to elevate the public profile of the work that we are doing so that it can inspire the next generation of female STEM pioneers. So their tagline, if she can see it, she can be it. So that idea of like taking the work that we're doing and trying to put more of a spotlight on it in public arenas so that more girls are inspired to come and be STEM professionals themselves.
I love that. And then one of the exhibits, which is funny because that is what you do, is actually these life-sized 3D printed statues of
Yes, it turns out if you make exhibits long enough, you become one. So
yeah.
it is great. Yes, one of the ways in which they are trying to elevate our public profile, they created 3D printed life-size orange statues of all 125 of us, which were because nothing says science like a giant orange likeness of yourself. But it's very trippy to stand next to yourself.
Oh, I can
It's always
imagine.
fun. But they were so they created these, and we were recently displayed at the Smithsonian Institution this past March as part of Women's History Month celebrations. They displayed all 125 of us across the Smithsonian institutions in Washington D.C.
So cool. It's
Yeah,
so
no,
cool.
it was really it's a very unexpected and kind of odd honor in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
But it is like it was amazing. I had the opportunity to go out during the opening weekend and engage with the public, and it sounds like kind of an odd thing, like oh, there's a giant orange statue, but just watching the faces, particularly on the younger girls, and having conversations with people, and it's like they were so excited and in awe of all of the women scientists and STEM professionals who were there and like just the different work and just seeing sort of the light bulbs go on of like, well, I didn't know you could do that, or go skiing and study avalanches for a living, or all of these different crazy things. Just watching people's sort of worlds open up or their perceptions change about what a scientist looks like and what a scientist does, or even what quote unquote doing science entails. If there was a real power to that, so I'm just so proud to be a small part of that.
Oh, I love that so much. And one thing that I've noticed as I've been kind of reading about you online and digging deeper and deeper even as we talk is that sometimes you're sort of presented as a physicist, a science educator, a public science communicator, as we mentioned, the senior exhibit developer at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. But sometimes I see this like longer list of musician, model, athlete, actor, martial artist. And so, what we haven't talked about yet is sort of your path to getting where you are now and the different things you studied in school, the different kind of hats you tried on, and your various interests. So, tell me, you were slash are a musician.
I am, yes. So I have played violin since I was 5.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have always, I literally cannot remember a time when I didn't play. So that's been something that I've been interested in from a very early age, as well as math and science. So I started violin at 5, but I also did like math camp and orchestra camp, those kind of things. So when I got to high school and was starting to look at colleges, I really was torn between wanting to study music, or at the time I thought I wanted to go to med school, but pursuing science because I still loved both of them. And ultimately, I decided not to decide, and I double majored in music and in physics. At DePaul University in Indiana. So I did my undergrad there, um, and it really just the two things have always been very complementary in my mind. Science is an incredibly creative endeavor, And so a lot of my arts training, I went to a performing arts school as a kid as well, sort of studied theater in addition to the music. But all of those things really feed into each other. And so that sort of mindset of sort of an artist and that creativity is also the mindset of a scientist, to think of something no one else has thought of, or like to ask questions and then come up with ways to sort of interrogate that and explore and find the answers. It's the same kind of same mindset in order to do both things. But yeah, so I decided to study music and physics in undergraduate. And when I got to the end of undergrad, I kind of weaned out of being a starving artist my whole life. I still couldn't decide, but I was like, well, I don't know about this whole, go get an MFA and then maybe get a job. So I decided to go to grad school and get a PhD in physics, because there was also a way to continue studying music. So I did play in orchestras and study music while I was also working on my PhD. So I've never not done both of them.
I
So I
get it. I
played.
gotta say, I get it, because I feel like if I were in the same position, and I have been actually, because I studied music in college too, which is very
Hmm,
strange. I was a jazz
ah,
vocalist, and I
oh, cool.
remember deciding to make that decision of like, I could be a professional musician, but it's hard to be an amateur scientist or psychologist. But
Yeah,
you can be a
yeah,
professional scientist or psychologist. You can still be an amateur musician if you like.
right. There are more pathways for that.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I
Right.
still play with an orchestra here in Chicago.
Oh, very cool.
So
Oh, I
yeah,
love
which is
that.
yeah, no, I play with the Lakeview Orchestra here, which is full of a lot of people who there are some professional music educators and musicians, but there's also a lot of people like me who studied very seriously for a long time, but ultimately chose a different career path, but still want to play and perform at a high level. So we're out there
And of
for
course,
sure.
I don't know if it's easy to put our finger on it, because I don't think it's as simple as some people try to make it out to be, but there is definitely this I don't know what the right word is, this confluence, this sort of um corroboration between the two fields. Like they play off of each other, but they also enhance one another. The more you do music and you dig deeper and deeper, in many ways, the more your eyes are open within the sciences, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually like the gist of a project I'm working on right now, actually, on music and the brain. So it talk about a whole bunch of people who were musicians, but then ultimately, went to be professional scientists. There's some really fascinating kind of neuroscientists that I've been working with and talking to.
Oh, I love
Um,
that.
yeah, but I think maybe something that's common between the two is that the art and science are both just ways of looking at the world, and sort of a way to interpret it and make sense of it and make meaning. Um, so they really can't exist without each other.
I agree. And you mentioned before this kind of the creative process that's necessary for both of these fields. This idea, I think that there's this huge misunderstanding and oversimplification when people try to talk about left brain versus right brain, or that, some people are more artistic and some people are more scientific, is that there is a fundamental creative process in science, and there is a fundamental logic and kind of math to music, and they can't exist without the other. It's all they're holistic. Both of them are.
Yeah. And science, just historically, we're coming out of an era where it's been very siloed. And this perception that you're a biologist or a physicist or whatever. But historically, you've had people who are sort of these polymaths, going back to like Da Vinci was an incredible inventor and an artist. You have just a history. He's the first example that comes to mind, but also it's like there's just history is riddled with these folks, where they just seamlessly moved between humanities and arts and science, and we sort of got into a space, sort of in 20th century or 19th century science. I'm not a science historian, so if any of you are listening, don't take me too seriously on this.
Right.
But we did sort of move. Science sort of moved into an era where it was really siloed, and you had to specialize in a thing. And so it's interesting to see it moving back to so this idea of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary collaborations. It's not new.
Right.
We like to think of it as new, but really the sort of the blurring the lines between different disciplines, including the arts, I think makes for better science.
And there's one other sort of discipline that whose line is blurred for you personally, but I think also is often left out of the conversation. I think we're seeing this more and more in my field, in psychology and psychotherapy and kind of neuroscience. This idea of like embodied experience, and you also have been, are an athlete, a martial artist. Kind of the physical body's expression or engagement with reality and expression of creativity is sort of I don't know. For some reason, it's usually not part of that conversation when we talk about art and science.
Right. Well, and what you're saying, as you were talking, it sort of made me think about back to like experience design and exhibit development,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like
Yeah.
that idea of an embodied experience. It goes back to what we were talking to about like authenticity. Like, why would you get off your couch to come to a place to do a thing?
Right.
Maybe there's something to that. I mean, you're the psychologist here. You tell this is your expertise. I just play one on TV.
Right.
But I just know enough to talk to you. Um, but maybe there is something to that about sort of like the physicality and the embodiment of an experience
Yeah.
or of developing knowledge. Maybe there's something to that, but it's like, what is that important? What is that
Right.
aspect that's so important to the human experience and human learning?
Right. Like there's this entire kind of network. I mean, it's more than one network. There are multiple networks of the brain that are I mean, whole like real estate of the brain that's dedicated to like where you are in space and how you relate to your own form and how that form interacts with things around you. Yet, when we talk about, I don't know, life, when we talk about our work, when we talk about our passions, unless you're, an athlete, we don't often bring that into the conversation. Yet you're right, it's so incredibly important. It's so important as you are developing these museum exhibits. What's at eye level? What's within hand reach? How, where are your feet going? How does your body feel within the space? Do you feel like you belong? Do you feel like you're an outside observer or like you're a part of the exhibit? I mean, these are all really important considerations.
Hmm. Yeah. But I think the world is starting to become, well, I would hope the world is starting to become more aware of that too. The lockdown was hard on everybody, and part of it was, that lack of, even if you don't think you have sort of an embodied part of what you do, you're not a professional athlete, but there is something about getting up and going to an office and interacting, that ritual of doing that sort of the commute and however you set up your day. It became very different for everybody very quickly when it's like, well, you had to set up a new space and figure out a new way to do things. So finding that value in having some sort of embodied or in-person experience, whatever that looks like for what you do, um, there is value in that for sure.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I mean, I I think everybody had the experience of lockdown, like you said, kind of throwing their routine off, but also sort of either not being engaged with their own bodies the way that they used to be, or like kind of going the other direction and being overly engaged with their bodies in a way that they didn't used to be. And I'll tell you, even beyond lockdown, and I know everybody's kind of had their own struggles through all of this, but for me, I've been completely out of commission for the past month because I had surgery on July 5th. And I talked about it on my show. I had a total hysterectomy after an early cancer diagnosis. And I I remember like on day 3 when I couldn't do anything, like I couldn't get in and out of a chair easily. I couldn't lay down, sit up because I couldn't use my abdominal muscles at all. Just wailing and being like, I will never take my body for granted. I will never take movement for granted ever again. And now being able to twist and being able to bend and being able to reach down and pick something up off the floor, like I'm already at a stage where I can use my body in a way that I couldn't in the previous weeks. And I don't know, it's incredible how much we forget when something becomes so commonplace.
Well, or is it like I bet you have a different appreciation
For
for it.
sure.
I think we're all forced to do that, where it's like you appreciate, what you miss, but then also like you probably have a different value proposition on
Yes.
how you use your body or
That's
how
a
you,
great way to put it.
yeah. So,
Absolutely.
looking at sort of our experience, and, again, for me specifically in my work about like exhibit design, but it's like, what is it that's really valuable here? It's like, and how do you only have so much emotional effort to give in the world, so you better ration it. So prioritizing, like, where do you put your effort and emphasis? And I think we all found that it was a little bit different coming out of the pandemic. Not unlike what you're experiencing now with sort of your physical body, and understanding, like, being grateful for having some of that functionality back, but you're probably going to think a little bit differently about skydiving, or something
Yeah.
now.
And I think as I get older too, and that's something that obviously we often talk about, how like youth is wasted on the young, but like
Yeah,
as we get older and we develop perspective and we understand limitations, it's sort of like to be able to love, you don't fully understand it until you've had loss. To be able to, it's this very existential philosophical view, but to be able to feel in your body, the appreciation often comes when those abilities are either quickly taken away or they decline. And I think for a lot of people, there were some great lessons that could be learned, sadly, difficultly, painfully, from the pandemic. And I hope that those lessons aren't so quickly forgotten.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that there's yeah, whether you choose to to see it as an opportunity, that coming out of the pandemic, that you choose to see those limitations as an opportunity to do things differently or to place your effort differently. My part of my experience with lockdown was being locked down with a toddler.
Oof.
Um, Everybody had their challenges. At least I wasn't
Yeah.
trying to do like kindergarten homework during the pandemic and running a meeting. But I think it affected how I parented.
Mm-hmm.
Being confronted, given here, let's rephrase that. Given the opportunity to
Yes.
spend large amounts of uninterrupted time with my child,
Yeah. Yeah.
it really made me tune in to things as simple as like put your phone down and pay attention, like she's watching, or to watch like what an amazing little scientist she is. And like rather than seeing it as like why are you banging on all the pots and pans, it's like, you know what, let's embrace that. Does hitting this thing sound a little different if you hit it with a wooden spoon as opposed to the other metal pot? Does that sound different? And so it was an opportunity to spend more time, but also rethink how I was parenting, and how I was focusing, which then spilled over into sort of prioritizing, my work. Like, am I queuing into things that I might have missed because I was moving too fast or too distracted or too overwhelmed with the long list of things? So it really gave me an appreciation um, across all things in my life, from parenting to professional to running, and back to the physicality thing. So really tuning into what is important and how I go about it in ways that maybe I had just stopped paying attention or were too distracted to notice before.
Absolutely. And I think that, kind of coming back to the museum world, it would be so curious and interesting, especially for those individuals who study the science of science communication, who really look at like outcome variables and how effective is science communication and what are the trends in science communication, to really take a hard look at the post-pandemic or peri-pandemic changes in our public spaces, the lessons that we've learned, the adaptations that have been made, and how the museum experience hopefully will only be for the better, maybe more hybrid, maybe more inclusive, maybe just across the board that we're thinking about these problems differently. And of course, you had a front seat for that.
Yeah, yeah, no, we absolutely have been trying to key into that, and it gave us an opportunity to really see what was important to people or what really mattered or affected them, and how we could best position ourselves to support that, uh, and so to support those that experience and that sort of human connection, as well as learning science, of course.
Oh, for sure. And so, Olivia, I've kept you already longer than the hour that I promised I would keep you, but I always close my show with the same two questions. They're sort of like big picture questions, and I was hoping maybe I could steal you for another just like 2 minutes so that
Oh,
we
of
can get
course,
your perspective on these questions. Okay,
fire
cool.
away.
Cool, cool, cool. All right. So I want you to sort of think about the future. And when you're forward thinking, future thinking in whatever context is relevant. So you mentioned, raising a toddler. You mentioned the athletics that you do. You mentioned the music. You mentioned, kind of the personal life, the professional life. But of course, there's also the larger community, global, I don't know, even cosmic perspective. So whatever is relevant to you in this moment. Number one, what is the thing that really is keeping you up the most at night? The thing you're most concerned about, worried about, maybe, or even feeling a bit pessimistic, cynical? What's keeping you up the most at night? And then on the flip side of that, so that we end on a more positive note, where are you finding your optimism lately? Where are you finding your hope?
I think those are one and the same.
Okay. Yeah.
The things that keep me up at night and give me the most optimism, are really sort of the work that I'm doing. I have an exhibit project I'm working on right now, and parenting,
Okay.
frankly. So
Yeah.
we can pick those off separately. But the project I'm working on now, I I stay up at night because I care so passionately about making it an amazing experience and being a platform that can engage people in a meaningful way and in a different way around this particular science topic. And so staying up and getting down into the weeds and arguing the minutia in my head over and over again of the million decisions you have to make in developing an exhibit. Is this the right way? Is this going to be the most impactful experience? But it is also the thing that gives me the most hope because it is such an opportunity. And it's just, capturing lightning in a bottle is really hard, but it's an incredible opportunity to do something amazing and to share that with the world. So I get very excited that I'm able to do this at the same time as being very anxious of screwing it up.
So it's sort of both sides of the same coin. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
parenting could be summed up the exact same way. It is such an incredible opportunity. She's such an amazing, perfect little being, and I just have to stay out of her way and not mess it up. So just the on the worst of days, just coming home and there's a little one and everything is new and everything is exciting and it's just so sweet and it just gives you a lot of hope and perspective of what really matters. We were talking earlier about like there's only so much emotional effort to give in the world. She really makes me think hard about how to how to ration that effort and what really matters. So um, it is a very calming thing in a lot of ways, where it's like, you know what? While I might be up at 2 o'clock in the morning worrying about this one little micro decision in the exhibit, at the end of the day, I'm not solving world peace. It's a museum exhibit. There are more
Right.
important things. Like it is important, but it's a
But
good
oh,
reminder that
perspective.
yeah, but it's a reminder that it has to be a balance, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so
Well, Olivia, I feel like I've learned so much from you. I'm so excited. I really, 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 really am looking forward to coming by the museum the next time I'm in Chicago. I was hoping maybe you could tell us before we sign off how people can learn more, just kind of direct them to the right places.
Right. So if you are in Chicago or coming to Chicago, you can check out msichicago.org to get all the information you need about what we have here, how to get tickets, what's going on. That's your one-stop shop. And Cara, if you're
Awesome.
here, you know how to get a hold of me, so you better call and I will show you around myself.
Oh, hell yes. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. Well, Olivia, thank you so much for being here today. It was inspirational, exciting. I'm so glad to be back. And I think this was so perfect that this was the first episode back. So thank
No.
you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a fun conversation, and I'm again flattered to be your first conversation back.
And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.